Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight for Let's Electrify Yarra, Why Create an All-Electric Home. This is the first talk in our three-part series, Let's Electrify Yarra. I'm Mel Miller-Yule, and I'm a Sustainability Officer at Yarra City Council. I work in the Climate Emergency Team, where our aim is to support the Yarra community to transition to a city powered by 100% renewable energy by 2030. Before we begin, a bit about using Zoom tonight. Tonight's session is being recorded and your microphone is turned off and your video is off as well. We'll have time for questions after we hear from our presenter, and you can pop your questions in the Q&A function throughout the presentation, and we'll read them out to be answered during the Q&A time. Feel free to use the chat to share links or useful information. All the links that you see on screen during the presentation will be shared by email at the end of the session. Now I'd like to introduce Councillor Sophie Wade, Mayor of the City of Yarra, who will begin tonight's talk with opening remarks. Councillor Sophie Wade is a councillor of Nichols Ward and the current Mayor of Yarra. She has lived in and around Yarra for most of her life, and she now lives in Collingwood and loves being a part of the vibrant and bustling Smith Street precinct. Councillor Wade is a competition and consumer lawyer and has also spent time doing pro bono work at Refugee Legal in Collingwood. She cares about the climate, inequality, participation in democracy, and making the world both greener and fairer. Now I'll hand over to Councillor Wade.
Hi Mel, thanks for that introduction, and sorry for my slightly bizarre setting. I'm also in an arts advisory meeting at the moment that I've ducked out of because I think this is really important. Yarra City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the traditional owners of the lands now known as Yarra, and we also acknowledge the other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have contributed significantly to life in Yarra. And we'd like to pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you everybody so much for joining us tonight for this important event. Let's electrify Yarra, why create an all-electric home? Here in Yarra, we recognise that the climate emergency presents an enormous challenge which impacts us all at the local level, the regional level and the global level. We know that the scale for transformation and change needed goes well beyond the individual choices we make. But at the same time, we know that there is a need for each and every one of us to cut our carbon emissions. We recognise the important role that local government has to play. Through our climate emergency plan, we've committed together to create a city powered by 100% renewable energy. What I think is really exciting is that Yarra is actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary of being carbon neutral this year, which I think is like a really big milestone. But we also recognise that there's a way to go, like as much as we've been able to offset our diesel-powered utes or we've still got gas in our buildings. We've really now got to transition out of that, and that's what we're working towards. And that fits nicely with the theme of tonight. Switching from gas to all-electric buildings is a really important part of the transition. Gas is a fossil fuel which emits greenhouse gases just like any other fuel. All-electric buildings can be completely powered by renewable energy with either solar or a green power electricity plan. So that's why we're transitioning our buildings off gas. We've electrified 10 council-operated small buildings and currently have another 10 in progress. We're upgrading the heating, hot water and cooktops in these buildings. We also have a plan to get our Collingwood Leisure Centre off gas by 2025, which is a big one. All of our buildings' electricity needs are already met by renewable sources through solar on 38 of our buildings and wind power that we source through the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project. And by 2030, we have the plan for the rest of them to be off gas. We know that a transition away from using gas requires policy form at the federal and state level, but Yarra Council is advocating to other levels of government for stronger climate action, including accelerating towards 100% renewable energy and grid-supplied energy and a fast transition away from gas. We had a really great roadmap last year. Mel, I'm not sure if you were involved in that at all. Sorry, the really great submission to the gas substitution roadmap that the Victorian government were running. I was really impressed when I read Yarra's submission. I was like, oh, these people know their stuff, and we're really putting a really clear case forward. It made me very proud to be a member of the Yarra community. as well as transitioning our own operations and advocating off gas and advocating for policy change, we think it's really important that we help our community take that journey too, because we know that emissions in Yarra are not just coming from council operated buildings. We're partnering with the Metropolitan Melbourne Community Power Hub, which is a Victorian government-led initiative that is being run by the Yarra Energy Foundation, YEF, who are obviously based right here in Yarra, which will help deliver free energy advice and access to quality, affordable solar energy systems and electric appliances to Yarra residents and businesses. We've also recently launched the Take Climate Action online hub, which has heaps of resources. I encourage you to check it out. I'm sure a link will be put in the chat, but it's a font of knowledge. Tonight is the first of a 3-part series of online talks designed to inspire and empower you on your journey towards creating an all-electric home. We welcome Dr. Josh Byrne, environmental scientist, researcher, ABC TV Gardening Australia presenter and author. Josh is also the director of Josh Byrne and Associates, a consulting practice that integrates the fields of landscape architecture and built environment sustainability with a portfolio of award-winning projects spanning urban development and civic space design. Very, very cool, Josh. Josh's approach is leadership through demonstration. He engages in projects that provide the opportunity to test innovation, build capacity, and share learnings with stakeholders in the wider community. Josh holds a PhD and is an adjunct professor with the Research Centre for Water, Energy and Waste at the Harry Butler Institute at Murdoch University. His favourite pastime is gardening. Solid pastime. Josh has undertaken the design and construction of his own 10-star energy efficient house, which has since gone all electric. Josh's house aims to demonstrate that resource efficient homes can be built at a comparable price to other types of houses. Josh's house showcases the benefits of sustainable housing through a wealth of resources, videos and information that can be found on his website, which again, I suspect is in the chat. I hope you come away from tonight's talk feeling inspired by the possibilities of creating an all-electric home and an all-electric future for our community. Josh, I'm really excited to hear from you. I'm not going to be hearing it all tonight, but I am going to be looking for the recording. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming in and joining us at Yarra.
And thank you so much, Councillor Wade, for taking the time out, even though we know you have another commitment this evening. We will certainly send you the recording afterwards. And welcome, Dr. Josh Byrne.
Thank you. And what a wonderful intro by Sophie. That was so great to see that energy and enthusiasm. And it just reminds me the vital role that local government is playing in a transition to a low carbon future. So well done, Yarra Council, and all the councillors and councillor staff, and of course the community. So my presentation is going to be looking at the transition to all electric homes. And what I wanted to do was to cover, firstly, why transition to an all-electric home? What are the drivers? Why would we be doing this? And Councillor Wade touched on a few of them, but I'll really put some into sort of further detail from a household, from a regular person's sort of perspective. And then we'll have a look at what does an electric home look like. And I will use my own home as a case study to show you what we designed and built and the changes that we made over a number of years. As new technologies became accessible and more cost effective, and really finishing at a point now where I think what we have in place and what we're demonstrating and collecting data on, which I'll share with you tonight, is something that is now accessible to the volume housing market, and there's really nothing holding us back to take this approach. Then I'll finish on scaling up and just touch upon very briefly some of the bigger projects that I'm involved in over here in Perth, where we're kind of applying what I've been doing at a household level and what many others around Australia are also doing, that is going all electric and providing our energy with renewables, how that can be scaled up to larger housing projects. And of course, the focus has to be on scaling up very quickly as we transition to a low carbon future. So what are the drivers behind going to an all-electric home? Well, let's start with the need to respond to climate change. And this is an obvious one. Climate change is the great sort of moral imperative of our time to respond to it. And if we look at the role of buildings and also our houses, they have a big role to play. We know that around 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the built environment, from operational energy. So that's running buildings and the like. In Australia, nearly 60% of that is from our homes. And the thing is that decarbonising residential buildings is possibly the lowest hanging fruit as we do look to decarbonise our economy. And there's been an enormous amount of work done by researchers over a number of years through organisations like the CRC for Low Carbon Living and through industry groups like ASBEC, who are clearly demonstrating that not only is it technically possible, but actually the economic benefits to both households and the wider economy are all very positive. So this really is no-brainer stuff. We just need to push through a few old school barriers. So the cost savings to the household is another important driver. And I think this is really important that people understand, is that in nearly all circumstances in homes all around Australia, there are strong payback cases for moving to all electric, certainly for new builds and also for getting off gas when appliances pack up. And under most scenarios, moving to all electric is cost beneficial to the householder. And the reality is gas is no longer the cheap fuel in Australia, especially in the East Coast. And as we now see renewables being the lowest cost form of new energy generation, it makes sense that we make the most of that. Cost savings or paybacks for going all electric obviously varies depending on where you are around Australia. There are things like the different gas prices to consider. Over here in WA, we're on a different network altogether, on the Swiss as opposed to the NEM, but also there are different rebates in different states. But the underlying point is all around Australia, the cost drivers are there now to go all electric, supplied by renewables. And the final driver I wanted to touch upon is perhaps the most compelling, and that is health. The reality is burning of fossil gas inside a home, whether it be for cooking on a gas cooktop or for gas heating, is really bad for our health. And you know, the research is absolutely clear on this. The increased likelihood of asthma for children in particular, increased chance of coronary and lung disease from having gas burnt inside the home. And unfortunately, many of the mechanisms that are meant to be in place to reduce the impact of air quality problems from burning gas inside the home aren't always kept in good condition. So things like exhaust fans, they're either not used or if they malfunction. Sometimes people rely on opening and closing windows, which of course is not overly reliable. So really, we need to reconsider this idea. And then finally, with new homes, there's a big push to have homes better sealed, so less drafty for energy efficiency benefits, so to reduce the loss of heat from drafty buildings. But as our homes become better sealed, it becomes even more important to move away from having gas burnt inside the home. Otherwise, you can lead to significant air quality concerns. So what does an all-electric home look like? Well, ideally, it's energy efficient. It makes sense that if you're going to be fitting out a home with electric appliances or switching from gas to electric, to use efficient ones, so there's less energy required. Ideally, an electric home has rooftop solar, so you can really maximise the use of that solar that's generated by matching time of use with time of generation. I'll touch upon that a bit more in my case study. Ideally, the energy balance between what's used and what's generated is considered around something like a net zero energy home, which is a particular, I guess, model where over the course of a year, the amount of energy you use is matched with the amount of energy generated, not necessarily in real time, but like an energy balance over a net result over the course of the year. And that's a useful way of guiding the sizing of a solar system and the choice and operation of fixed appliances in particular. And the Green Building Council of Australia's Green Star Home Standard, which is now available for use for volume builders and large-scale developers, is an excellent example of where I think the guidance is at for the volume housing industry, where we look at the type of appliance selection, the type of PV system sizing, and that's certainly, I think, a good direction for pushing forward in terms of guidance of the volume housing industry. So let's have a look at my case study. So we built 2 homes on the one block. It was a family project. So the rear home is my family home and the front house is my sister-in-law's family house. The property is in a middle suburb in Hilton, which is in the city of Fremantle. And really what we set out to do was to firstly build homes that were comfortable to live in thermally, that would be cost effective to run. We wanted the homes to be net zero emissions. So we wanted to ensure that we were producing as much energy, if not more, than we're using. We wanted to collect and recycle what's our own water, and being a keen gardener, I wanted space to grow food as well. But we really wanted to demonstrate that you can deliver high performance homes for a similar price and a similar time frame to other volume houses in the market. And I wanted to break this myth or this perception that sustainable homes and high performance homes had to be bespoke. And so we set about doing this, and we designed the homes in 2011, 2012, and we had the homes built and finished in 2013. We designed and then had both homes certified to 10-star NatHERS rating. So they're designed to be thermally comfortable year-round without the need for mechanical heating and cooling. And we also use the HIA Green Smart House sustainability framework as a way of demonstrating how a range of performance criteria were addressed. And we use the Green Smart House protocol as a way of demonstrating to other volume builders how accessible this can be. So the homes themselves look like any other up and down the street. There's nothing particularly fancy or unusual about them. And for us, that's a good thing. We didn't want them to be, sort of out there eco homes. Not that I have a problem with that, but we wanted to show that this can look like any other house up and down the street, but it can perform and feel very, very differently. So this is the front yard of the front house, and you can see low water use landscaping, a fairly traditional house elevation to the street in line with the local council design guidance for the suburb. Inside the home, here you can see this is the open plan living, dining, sort of kitchen area. North facing windows to capture warming winter light and high performance, low E glazing, insulating curtains with pelmets so we can keep the warmth in during winter and not lose it outside. Concrete slab on ground, so good thermal mass, brickwork internally, they reverse brick veneer walls, all very well established solar passive design principles put into practice. Outside, again, that's the north elevation there, so you can see those lovely big north-facing windows. Shade sails and grapevines, providing shade in summer. In winter, they come down, the grapes lose their leaves, the house warms up, and lots of nice shading landscaping around it. So what this means is they're very comfortable homes. So they're sort of sitting in between that 18 and 26, 27 degree temperature range all year round. So this plot here shows blue line is the inside living area temperature at midday. So hovering around that sort of 22 to 24 degrees, which is sort of pretty typical. And outside you can see the range of temperatures getting up into the 40s in summer and into the low teens in winter. Again, this is at midday, just to compress the graph, but they've been very comfortable. And the reason why I wanted to show that is that, you know, typical Australian home, both here in Perth and in Melbourne, the biggest source of energy use inside a typical home is heating and cooling. And so by having a house that is thermally efficient, either as a new home or as a retrofitted home, and the suite of things you can do to reduce your heating and cooling, then straight away you've got a much more energy efficient house. But let's get into the all-electric story. So when we first designed and specified the home, the thinking, as I said, around 2011, the thinking of the day was for a low energy, low carbon home was to look at solar hot water system, gas boosted, and a gas cooktop as the most cost effective, I guess, low carbon heating and cooking and hot water heating technologies. And then having a rooftop PV system that would meet your net annual electrical loads, plus through some exports offset the carbon emissions associated with that gas use. And so gas was still very much being pitched as the traditional low carbon fuel. And so we call this, it's a dual fuel home. So we have electricity supplying the electrical loads, and we have fossil gas providing the gas demands, being the gas booster for the solar hot water system and the gas cooktop. So this is 2013 when we completed the home. The rooftop PV was a 3 kilowatt PV array size and a 2.5 kilowatt inverter. And what we found was that that produced more energy than we used over the course of the year. And for the solar hot water heater, we would rely just on the solar thermal bed for most of the year, but we would use gas booster in winter over cloudy days. And then we had the gas cooktop and an electric oven, which was a pretty standard configuration. And I should point out at that stage, induction cooktops were seen very much as a boutique luxury item. They weren't really an offering for the volume housing market, which was our target here. And likewise, air source heat pumps, which are now much more accessible for hot water systems. They were also very expensive and considered a bit out of the sort of volume market price range, hence going for the gas boosted solar hot water heater and the gas cooktop. Everything else is pretty standard. Designed to reduce daytime lighting needs. So you can see there on the left-hand side of the corridor with a solar tube, a skylight or light well to bring natural daylight into otherwise dark areas to reduce daytime lighting needs, and then in other rooms for artificial lighting using LEDs. Pretty much stock standard now. They were always fairly standard then. And then nothing new here. Low energy appliances. So good quality ceiling fans for a bit of cooling ventilation, and then good star rating appliances. Again, all of which have good cost payback drivers. They did then, they still do now. But the first change we made was in 2015. We added battery storage to the home energy system. Again, it was only a couple of years prior when we were designing the home that the idea of incorporating battery storage onto a residential property was a way off. It was still very expensive, technology hard to access, and even in 2015 we put our battery in, and it was the first battery on a grid-connected property on the Southwest interconnected system. It was part of a research project that I did with Curtin University and the CRC for Low Carbon Living. And the purpose of putting that battery in was to make the most of the solar that we were generating. So we had an appropriately sized system, but the reality is that the household was out at school and at work during the day when the energy was being generated. So we were putting it to the grid, but then we're putting it back at night time. So the battery was just there to basically help increase the utilisation of our own solar energy. And you can see that in this plot where the red line was the solar generation and energy use curve over a 24-hour period before the battery, and the green was after the battery, where basically we knock out export and demand, and we basically flatten it off and still putting everything back into the grid. So really are increasing self-utilisation. The next change came in 2018, so 3 years later. What we were noticing with our work, both here in WA, but also the research and consulting work I was doing in other cities around Australia, again, as part of the work I was doing with Curtin Uni and the CRC for Low Carbon Living as part of a research project called Mainstreaming Net Zero Energy Housing, working with large developers and volume builders around Australia. We could see that the technologies required to make a home all electric, namely inductions and heat pump hot water systems, were now readily much more accessible at a suitable price point. And there was an appetite from developers to start testing this idea of going all electric. Indeed, there were some pioneers really pushing it at scale, like Riverview Group through their gin and dairy project in ACT, where they were just getting underway with a large master plan community where stage one would be all electric. And this is in Canberra's heating dominated climate where gas use is sort of second nature. And they were really pushing boundaries. And so we started to have this dialogue with other developers around the country. Then I thought, well, why don't I test this stuff at home and understand what's involved in swapping out some of those gas-reliant appliances, putting in electric appliances, and understanding the load profile and any impacts on the sort of technology integration. So air source heat pump went in for a hot water system, pretty straightforward stuff now. We put in the induction cooktop. And look, there were some learnings around this in that previously, obviously there was no dedicated electrical circuit running to our induction location, so we had to run that, so a little bit of fiddling around, but nothing that wasn't manageable. So the induction went in. It also meant, of course, the real life stuff, like we had to buy a whole new set of pots and pans that were induction capable or suited to induction cooking. So there's always, you know, those little learnings that happen, but other than that, it was a pretty straightforward swap out. The other thing we did as part of this all-electric conversion is we wanted to understand the impact of home EV charging on our home system of charging and storage. So I was fortunate to have access to an EV for a trial period to understand the impact of those loads. And what was really interesting is that what we found was with the increased electrical loads between the induction and the car charging, the previous battery, which was fairly early technology in the greater scheme of things in terms of its energy management system. Battery chemistry was the same as what's commonly used now, lithium-ion battery chemistry, but the energy management system had a very low trip point just to protect itself. And so it meant that actually it was no longer compatible with the higher loads such as induction cooking and EVs. So we had to swap the battery out, and we also increased the size of the PV system to take into account the higher electrical loads. So this is now, given that we got rid of the solar hot water heater, which was gas boosted, and used that space for additional panels, we had to account for that load, and also accounting for the electrical cooking load, knowing that we were losing the gas cooktop. But I also wanted to offset estimated electrical demands for vehicle charging. So we put in a 6.6 kilowatt PV system and a 5 kilowatt inverter, which according to our energy modelling would meet the needs of the home and also offset the energy demands of running 2 electric vehicles at home. So one of the great things about working with the CRC for Low Carbon Living and Curtin was the detailed performance monitoring that myself and my colleagues did on the house over a number of years. In fact, we've been in the house for 9 years this year, and we're still monitoring. There's about 70 channels of data collection, continually monitoring, spanning everything from all the energy use across the different circuits, but also monitoring things like temperature and water use and a whole range of other channels as well. But here, this chart shows the energy use, the source of that energy, and the resultant greenhouse gas emissions across these 3 stages. So stage 1 was the original dual fuel configuration that I showed you. Stage 2 was when we added the battery to that same dual fuel configuration just to increase the utilisation of our self-generated solar. And then stage 3 is the all-electric that I mentioned with the upscaling of the PV system. Same size battery, I should say, both 10 kilowatt hour, the original one that went in at stage 2 and the new one that went in stage 3. But I'll just take you through some of the trends here. So what was interesting is with the original dual fuel configuration in stage 1, you can see we were obviously generating emissions as a result of having to burning gas, but also when we were using electricity outside of self-generation time. There's no battery at this point, but we were comfortably offsetting that with the exports to the grid. So that's what we would call a net zero energy home. Then stage 2, so similar loads, same loads actually, except here less export and more self-utilisation in the form of battery storage. Still some export, enough to offset those times when perhaps there wasn't enough energy in the battery, typically on winter days after multiple cloudy days. If we haven't charged the battery, which would happen from time to time, we would still pull from the grid. And of course, there was still the greenhouse gas emissions from the gas. And then into stage 3, the all-electric phase, where we are self-reliant on our own energy about 90% of the time. The times that we're pulling from the grid still, again, it might be after multiple cloudy days and the battery not being charged, or when we charge the car outside of daylight hours. We would always try and charge the vehicle during the day, particularly on the weekends, making the most of surplus solar that would otherwise just be exported to the grid. But as anyone who's driven an EV knows, there are times when you just got to top it up so it's ready for the next day. And so there would be some grid demand there. But importantly, still generating significant export and really now the house is like a mini power plant. We only operate 1 car rather than the 2. We sized it for 2, but we get by on 1. And we have found that typically we're generating 2 to 3 times the power that the house needs to run itself, and that's on a fairly modest 6.6 kilowatt PV array with a 5 kilowatt inverter that I mentioned. So the house is well and truly carbon positive. That is, we're offsetting a lot more carbon than being produced through operation of the house. And just to give you an idea of loads and how our all-electric home looks compared to a typical Perth house. So on the left-hand side, there's a makeup of our household load. I should also point out that we are running some things that the average house doesn't have. So 1, charging the EV, but also we have rainwater harvesting with pumps. We have a grey water system with a pump, and we also have a shared bore across the 2 properties, which is basically taking up locally infiltrated stormwater, and we use that for irrigation. So we don't use any mains water outside. It's all locally sourced water. But each of those water sources has a load. So we're meeting that load obviously through solar as well. So we have about a 30% reduced load to a comparable household size and house typology to us in terms of Perth data. And that's including the additional loads we have, as I said, for the water supply and running of the EV. The biggest difference between our house really and a typical Perth home, you can see there with the orange block there, is that we don't have the air conditioning. We don't have the HVAC energy loads. So how do we look at scaling this up? So a couple of projects I'll touch upon, and I can point you to further resources there. You can see there's the URL to my company website, and we have a projects page on there, and you can download or you can have a look at these project profiles with more information. But East Village at Knutsford, by our state development agency called Development WA, is a intensive infill project just outside of the city CBD here in Fremantle. It's a brownfields redevelopment. So it's just over a hectare in size, and it's made up of 36 townhomes and 2 apartment sites. And that whole project, both the townhomes and the 2 apartment sites, is all electric. So gas is in the area, but Development WA committed to a demonstration of a low carbon, high performance infill precinct. And so as part of that, design guidelines around the townhomes, minimum 7.5 star, that is rated, all electric, rooftop PV, similar size system to ours, 6.6 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt inverter. But the difference here is that all 36 townhomes are linked up to a shared battery, 670 kilowatt hour battery, and essentially the homes are sharing energy with that battery, so charging it when exporting and taking it back, and there's a real-time development billing system that looks at charging and reimbursing people for their power use and power generation. The technologies in play in these townhomes are all the things that I touched upon with Mileplace. So air source heat pump hot water system, induction cooktops, low energy lighting, high efficiency fixed appliances, and then that rooftop PV system. And the way that operates is when people are generating power, and if they've got their own PVs, their own inverter, and if they're using that in real time to charge their EV or to heat their hot water or do what they do, then that's free power that they're using at that time. It's only when it's exported, rather than exporting to the grid, it exports to the shared battery. And same when they pull back, they don't pull back from the grid, they pull back from their battery. And then the battery bank then interacts with the grid. So it's what we call a microgrid, and fantastic for these sort of strata or shared asset type developments. And then the second one, bigger in scale again, more recent, is 115 Hamilton Hill. Again, by Development WA, the WA State Government Development Agency, which is really charged with demonstrating leadership in this space and is doing some fantastic work, certainly recognised for their leadership role. So this is another infill development in the suburb of Hamilton Hill, just near Fremantle, in the city of Coburn. And it's on an old school site that was rezoned to infill housing, and the old school was amalgamated with a neighbouring school and made into a larger school. And so the idea here was to demonstrate a range of cost-effective housing typologies, ranging from terrace or townhomes through to small group dwellings, through to small apartments or small multi-res, demonstrating different construction types, but also leadership in low carbon urban development and water sensitive urban design. So here the design guidelines require all homes to again meet a minimum 7.5 star net HERS performance, so they'll all be thermally efficient. The development with some 250 lots and eventually some 330 plus dwellings is all electric, so there's no gas reticulated. Once again, gas in the area, but the decision was made not to reticulate any gas to the development. So all the homes and, of course, all the public infrastructure will all be electric. The design guidelines, which need to be followed for people to build homes, in addition to meeting the NatHERS thermal performance requirements, there are requirements around efficiency of fixed appliances, minimum PV sizing, a requirement to put a home EV charge point in. And all of these have been demonstrated with payback periods within a 10-year payback period, and the market's accepting it very, very well. And I guess this is probably our best example. It's literally under construction now. All the civil works and landscaping for stage one's complete. Lots for stage one are now selling and selling well. The first houses are under construction. And what we're seeing is that the market is very accepting of these requirements, if you like. So no gas, and the need to up-spec the nature of the homes and the fit out to achieve a net zero emission, low carbon home and low carbon development. It's not that it doesn't come with a cost. Of course, it comes at a financial cost, but the payback periods are solid, and we're seeing that growing appetite. The real challenge now is how we continue to mainstream these approaches to further drive down any cost impost, so it becomes affordable really across the market in terms of volume housing, both new and retrofits. But the point I will make, just to finish up before we maybe throw open to the panel and questions, is that this stuff is no longer, the ideas of the future. The technology, the governance requirements are all there, all tested. The data is clear, and the market interest is there and growing stronger and stronger all the time. So now what we need to do is really focus on getting the word out there and demonstrating the values of the all-electric approach when supplied with renewable energy, whether that be on site or through large-scale renewables that are feeding the grid. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Josh. That was really interesting and so inspiring to hear you talk about the example of your own house and the examples of the developments. I thought it was really encouraging and inspiring to hear that the financial imperative is there, the technical requirements are there, I mean, everything is in place, and as you said, there's nothing holding us back. So now it's really about taking those next steps and showcasing, mainstreaming, demonstrating how it's done. And I think your house is such a fantastic example, and to see how it's been monitored this whole time, and can really give that really in-depth case study and that evidence to show how it works and why it's something that really anyone can do. So we'll throw open to questions. I guess the other thing that I was really, what I really thought was powerful was that the examples that you shared show how really any type of home can go all electric. So there's the example of your house, which although you built it as a new build, when you went all electric, it was retrofitting those appliances. So it was actually retrofitting an existing home. And then you shared the examples of new builds that went across a range of typologies. There were strata and townhouses and freestanding homes. So yeah, really great to see so many different examples of how it can be done. So we've got some questions from the group. Greg asks, I've just installed solar, but I still have a gas hot water tank. When it's time to replace it, can I get a normal electrical hot water tank system that's timed to switch on during the day to take advantage of the solar power? So I think he maybe means not a heat pump.
Yeah, so the answer is definitely. What's been really interesting is that with the advent of cheap rooftop solar, where for most households they've got surplus solar during the day. It's meant that we can revisit the idea of the electric resistance heating hot water storage, and as you know, it wasn't that long ago when they were considered evil. There were programs to kind of get rid of them and replace them with gas as a lower carbon and more cost-effective alternative. But now that people are producing their own energy from their rooftop, provided that's timed with the heating and hot water, and you want an efficient system that retains the heat well, and provided that heating element's not coming on outside of the period where you're generating power. And of course, there are all sorts of effective controls you can put in place now to make sure that it's only surplus solar topping that up and heating that water. And there's lots of work being done on that, including by utilities who are looking at the potential for hot water heating via that method to soak up surplus solar to take some of the pressure off the grid during peak generation.
Yeah, great. That's really good to know. There's a similar, it seems to be a related question from Judy. Judy says, I don't think my Yarra block, which is a single fronted terrace, would fit a heat exchange. I only have a gas cooking and on-demand hot water. I haven't found any similar electric forms for a similar water heater.
Yeah, the instantaneous electric water heaters are very inefficient. So if you were to look at electric heating of hot water, you do want to make sure there's storage and it's timed for making the most of surplus solar, because otherwise the actual load required to heat the element for instantaneous hot water off electric, and they're normally small systems with small flow capabilities anyway. It's very high load. So I would investigate opportunities for electric storage with rooftop solar. And one of the challenges with heat pump hot water systems is the noise they make. They do make noise when the compressors are running. And some of the better quality, more expensive models are actually less noisy than some of the more, I guess, budget conscious models. So make sure when you are looking for hot water systems and you're thinking about a heat pump, do consider that practicality, because where you put them, particularly on small blocks where it might be next to neighbours' bedrooms or living areas or what have you, just have a think about location and also time of operation. You can program the operational window for a heat pump just like you can do a typical hot water system. So you can also run that during the day as well.
Yeah, that's good to know. So if you can't find a place that's out of everyone's hearing, you could at least time it so that it's at a time of day that's hopefully not as disruptive. There's another question about EVs and EV chargers. Tracy says, I've heard that some new EV chargers allow the EV battery to act as a home battery. Can you talk, is there anything that you can comment on about this? And do you need both? Do you need a solar battery as well as an EV battery if you're going down that route, I think is.
Yeah, sure. No, great question. We're really on a bit of a cusp of I guess of technology adoption there. What's being referred to is vehicle to home, which is where you charge your EV up, whether it be off solar or anywhere else. But then when you can plug the vehicle in at home and actually use the battery in the vehicle to run the household, or in some cases, with some vehicles, key emergency appliances. So the rationale behind that is that a typical home battery size for installation, like I showed you at mine, normally starts around the 10 kilowatt hour, and some people might look at going even up to double that for higher energy using homes. So anywhere between 10 to 20 kilowatt hour storage is pretty typical of mainstream sort of volume housing. Whereas when you have a look at a EV, most modern EVs these days have got batteries that are anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70 kilowatt hours. So you've got a big battery on wheels, and with the typical mileage that most people drive, I think it's sort of around 36 to 40 k's a day. It's the typical Australian urban dweller sort of daily vehicle use. You only use a fraction of the energy stored in that battery for your running around. And so the theory, quite simply, is why not use the remainder of that to run the house? But it all has to do with time of connection and time of use. So the beauty of having a stationary battery, like I showed you, is that it is going to top up during the day because that's when the sun's available and you can use it at night. If you're relying just on the battery in your vehicle, if you get up first in the morning and drive to work with it and it's sitting in a car park somewhere, well, it's not being charged with renewables unless there is a scheme that you can tap into and charge it off an EV charger, albeit a triple charge or whatever it might be, where that energy is coming from a renewable source, and then you can bring it home and plug it back in. And I think that's where things are going to go. We're going to see much greater integration of storage within vehicles as part of smart grids. And we might start to move away from the idea that you have to generate your own renewables on your own roof, use your own battery. We'll start to see the blurring of those lines, and this is largely being enabled through advances in metering technology, telemetry and communications technologies. But the final piece of the puzzle is at what point the mainstream vehicle manufacturers will start to enable that vehicle-to-home charging capability, because the really expensive part of most EVs is the battery. And the biggest risk for EV manufacturers is the life of that battery and things going wrong within the warranty period. And because battery health and battery longevity has got to do with the number of cycles, certainly with current battery chemistry, there's been a reluctance to necessarily move away from the battery just running the car, where there's much more control on how that battery is charged, how it's discharged through the onboard energy management system. That said, there's been a bunch of trials done in this space. There are some early adopter manufacturers that are moving towards the vehicle to home charging. Next will be vehicle to grid, so it's beyond just vehicle to house behind the meter, but actually seeing those vehicles when they're plugged in, potentially being part of a local network storage solution and network buffering solution. And I think that'll all happen pretty quickly because this stuff's moving fast.
Yeah, fantastic. That was a really clear and thorough explanation. And it is a really good point that things are moving quickly, and it's an exciting time for electric vehicles. And it goes back to that point that you made earlier about when you started on the journey of building your home, the advice around what to do with gas and where heat pumps and induction cooktops were at was quite different to where it was just a few years after.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, it's exciting to see things moving so quickly.
Mel, can I add something else just to that as well?
Yeah.
Battery storage. In that, I always like to be clear about where I think we need to go in terms of really, energy management within cities. Is that we need to move away from this idea of being off grid and being self-reliant, and having your own panels and your own battery, and everyone else can go get stuffed. That's crazy. One of the great things about cities, one of the things that makes a city is we have shared infrastructure that we've all invested in, and our predecessors invested in, and our kids and our kids' kids will be paying off forever. So we want to maximise shared infrastructure. So the idea of home batteries, and like I had at mine with our little trial, as I said, it was the first one on the Swiss, and it took many months of approval. We had the then Minister for Energy come and have a look at it because it was so novel, which seems absurd now, just a few years later. But it was, and there was all this talk of, okay, can people go off grid now? And I was like, no, that's not the idea. This is a device to help increase the utilisation of renewable energy. But moving beyond that, we're still be connected. It's about how do you optimise the grid, and how does storage, whether it be behind the meter on a house scale like ours, or whether it be at a precinct scale like East Village development I showed you, where you've actually got shared storage but it's still behind the meter for a strata development, or in the case of 115, where we haven't required people to put batteries in as part of the design guidelines. They need to be all electric, they need to be efficient, they need to have solar, and we recommend people may want to consider installing a hybrid inverter so they can put a battery in at a time when the pricing's more compelling, because the batteries are one of those areas where, depending on where you are and depending on the rebates and the incentives, it can be a marginal business case, as in just either side of a 10-year payback. But what's happening over here in WA on our Swiss network, and particularly in parts of the metropolitan grid, is community battery storage, which is a term that's been used where large lithium chemistry batteries are being installed in weak points across the grid to stabilise it, to soak up the enormous amount of rooftop solar that's being produced. Where we're seeing that a massive penetration and increasing penetration of rooftop solar. So to soak that up, but then also to be able to dispatch that at peak times. And so really, I think that's the future. Where yes, we're all generating solar on our roofs, and there's solar and other renewables, wind farms, the like being generated outside of the metro area, connected back into the grid, so we can have move towards a reliable 100% renewable source of energy supply. But then we use the grid in a really smart way to move that energy around based on time of use, demand, and have storage in a range of formats, from behind the meter to shared, to perhaps even non-battery storage in other ways. And again, all of that's happening so fast, which is so exciting.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's really good. It's a really good point. And yeah, really great to hear about the examples of community batteries in WA. And we've also got the Yarra Energy Foundation based in Yarra, who are working on a pilot community battery this year in Yarra. So that's, yeah, exciting times here as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I think that the point that you made about EVs also underscores that point that we're all interconnected, and that's a positive, and we need to maximize that. If your EV is at home overnight, but then you drive it somewhere and park it there for the day, well, if you can connect it where you are and it's all connected to the grid, then you can maximize that. Whereas if you're just relying on your own solar and batteries at home, that opportunity is not really there for you. Yeah. So there's actually a related question. Kate says, thanks for the presentation, Josh. I was interested about technology changes and how the decisions that you made in 2013 were different to those that you made only a few years later. Do you have any thoughts on how we manage the transition of our homes with such a fast pace of change of technology? And similarly, how we can respond to people who are saying, but I'm waiting for XYZ technology, which is just around the corner?
Great question. So how we approach that, and how I approach this fundamental question in other projects moving forward, is that we start with getting the basics right, because most of the wins come through getting the basics right. And that's why I took a little bit of time just to explaining the design of our home. So most of the energy savings, and therefore most of the carbon savings, come from the fact that we've designed solar passive homes with ideas that have been around forever, tested and proven time and time again. So good orientation, the good mix of materials, good insulation, and we operate the home sensibly. And so we have a low energy, low carbon home as a result of that. We then add efficient appliances and lighting, of course, again, improves efficiency. Then we add renewables, so we're providing it with renewable energy, and then we add storage. And some of those appliances will change, and the efficiency of PV generation will improve, and battery chemistry will improve and change. How we decide to store it, move it around will change. But if you focus on those fundamentals first, you can't go too far wrong.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Josh. We've come to the end of our time, so I'll just ask Sam if you could put up the slide that has the links for more information. Thank you. So thank you to everyone so much for joining us tonight, and a huge thank you to Dr. Josh Byrne, and also to our Yarra City Council Mayor, Councillor Sophie Wade, for joining us for the opening remarks today. You will now have an email in your inbox which will have just come through to you. That will include all of the links that you see on your screen and the links that we've shared during the presentation. And it will also include a quick survey. So we'd love to have your feedback on this session. If you have a question that hasn't been answered and you're in the City of Yarra, you can get in touch with the Metro Community Power Hub, which is an initiative of the Victorian government that's run by or led by the Yarra Energy Foundation. They can answer your energy questions, and if you have a complex inquiry, they can book you in for a free 30-minute phone consultation with the energy experts at Renew. For more information, you can visit our website, in our Take Climate Action online hub. We have a page all about all electric homes, which you'll see at the top there. Please have a look at Josh's house. It's full of resources, all kinds of information on creating a sustainable home. And he's also got the Sustainable House Handbook that's just come out recently, which you can order through that website as well. I've mentioned the free energy advice, and you can also get free no obligation quotes for electric appliances and discounted solar systems through the Metro Community Power Hub. There's a link there to Victorian government rebates for, there's a whole series of rebates that the Victorian government offers. There's rebates for solar and batteries, hot water systems, electric heating and cooling, and also electric vehicles. And you can visit solar.vic.gov.au to see those. We have 2 more online talks in the Let's Electrify Yarra series, and they're the next 2 Thursdays at the same time. So please join us for how to create an all-electric home, to hear from a local Yarra resident who has created an all-electric home, and also the Metro Community Power Hub. And you can join us the following Thursday for Choosing a Green Electricity Plan, where you'll hear from Greenpeace, who have just released the new Green Electricity Guide, and you'll hear from Renew about green power. And finally, we have an event at the end of April with Solar Victoria on their new virtual power plant pilot program. So you can join us on the 27th of April. So I know all of those links are very long, but you can check your email. You don't have to copy them down now. So thanks very much for joining us, and a big thank you to Josh. We hope to see you all at another event soon.
Thanks, everyone.